I have actually taught an entire graduate, full semester long graduate class on action research, which probably won't happen again until most of you have graduated. But I was just thinking I should revive it, but I'm not next year, and then I'm on sabbatical, so it'll be at least 3 years before I can do it. So sorry. But anyway, this is going to be a very high level overview, but also with some resources that'll give you a chance to kind of start brainstorming what you could do as action research and plan for your own potential projects. And I'm always here to consult if you would like as well. So if anybody wants slides to follow along, it's this URL, go.hawaii.edu, lowercase x, capital D, lowercase I. I'll give you the link again later. You don't have to get it now unless you really want to have them up there to follow along as it's on the screen too. So small x, big D, lowercase I. Okay, everybody got it? All right, unfortunately, the clicker they gave us doesn't seem to work, so I will have to touch the screen every time we move forward, maybe. Okay, there we go. Now, and I have to say, yes, recording. No, not there. Oh, maybe. All right. I don't know why it really, really wants to be in the middle of the screen. I'll move it down there instead. Okay, so what is action research? How many of you think you know, or you have a definition? Anybody got a so-so? Okay, some people, Lucas, you better know because you're going to tell us about a project that you actually did. Okay. All right, there we go. So action research is it is a form of research, and one of the reasons that we're talking about it here is because it is a very, very accessible and doable way for teachers to do research. But it's also a very democratizing approach to research. As you can see, some of the theories that start action research or that ground action research, democratization. Rather than saying researchers are university people and teachers just take what researchers decide is best practice, it makes the teachers the researchers. Problematization. So really looking at classrooms and saying, things aren't necessarily working. How do we decide what is the problem and how do we understand it? Empowerment of teachers. Ownership of the curriculum. So if you've ever worked in a program where you were just told, here's the curriculum, somebody else designed it, you teach it. That's very, I mean, first of all, it's not a particularly democratic way of teaching, but it really gives teachers instead a way to say, I've tried something and here's how it works. We could put this into our curriculum, or at least in my class, it works. Professionalization, this is another one of those discussions of how do we treat teachers? Are teachers just people who implement things, or are our teachers people who actually are professionals who have expertise and know what they're doing? Transformation and teacher-driven change. Some scholars of action research say it should lead to changing society. And it has that potential. If you're able to document things work for my students' lives are better, this is a change to society. And some action research can even implement change much farther beyond that. Project-based language learning is one where if you're doing research on a project, you really have a strong evidence for making change in the world beyond just your classroom. So this is sort of the traditional action research cycle. It's depicted as a circle. You start up at the top with figuring out what is it that I want to change. That's the planning phase. Then you put it into practice. You actually teach the lesson or the activity or the intervention that you want to try out. Then you observe the results. reflect on what they mean, which it can actually go much deeper than just reflection. It can be your analysis in whatever format you want to do. And then this is what makes action research different from other research studies. You actually make changes to what you're doing based on the outcomes of your analysis. Rather than trying to document keep the intervention consistent and measure, the way a more quantitative study would do. Action research, the whole point is to revise and change the intervention and then to document how it works when you teach it again. So in the plan stage, things you want to do, needs analysis. Figure out what's going on in my classroom. What do my students need? What's working and what's not working? Because if it's working, you don't necessarily need to make a change. But there's things that aren't working. That's what you want to change. Figuring out what instructional points you want to change. What is your student's language level at the beginning? And this is one that's a really important piece of action research, because if you want to make any claims for your intervention changing students' learning, you need to know what they knew before you did the intervention. Developing some sort of learning outcomes and planning your materials and your lesson. Let's see if I can turn this so I can actually look at my. Yeah, okay, I can actually look at the screen while I'm talking instead of having to keep turning around. Okay, yeah, so then, and you start planning out over how much time am I going to do this? How is this going to work? And so you make your lesson plan to reflect what you want to try in your teaching. Then you act. You actually do the thing you want to investigate. So you carry out the intervention, however long it takes. It may be a small thing you want to try just for 1 week or 1 unit, or it might be a bigger change that you want to try over an entire semester. I was on a student's dissertation committee where she did semester-long cycles of action research. She was teaching Vietnamese 101 and 102. And so her first cycle was the entire first semester. And she tried out using more task-based language teaching in her curriculum. By the end of the semester, she'd figured out what works, what didn't work, and then she revised her plans for 102 to use what she had learned. And then she had an entire year where she could use the results from that previous year to reteach 101 and 102 using her new findings. So the amount of time depends a lot on what it is you want to try. But you do want to make sure you're doing good teaching. So it shouldn't just be, this is one thing I'm doing and the rest of my teaching doesn't matter. I'm assuming you're here because that is not how you feel about teaching. So you do all of your normal teaching, but you're also really trying this new approach. And then you're documenting, how is this working? That's the observation part. And that's also part of what makes this research rather than just good teaching. Taking notes while you're doing the intervention, collecting students' work to see how are they doing with this. As you're starting out, are they responding the way you thought they would? If not, you can also make changes in the middle. It doesn't have to be at the end of a cycle. You might make video or audio record students' discussions, various ways of documenting how are they actually doing with this activity. But you could also be talking to the students. So you don't have to just see what they do in class. You can actually sit down, you could survey them, you could do interviews with them, you could do a focus group where you have several students talk together to find out, what's your experience with this? Are you enjoying it? What's working for you? What's not working for you? What are you going to do with this information in the future? So it is research, you're collecting data. But another really important piece is this last point. You should also be keeping a teacher reflection journal, because as the teacher and the researcher, what you are doing and how you feel about it is an important data point. So keeping a good journal where every time you do something related to your intervention or your teaching, or you interact with a student, you write stuff down, because afterwards, you won't remember every moment of every class period. So you need this record, and that is data, and that can actually be an important part of your analysis. It's also something that can be it can be an initial analysis phase too. your journaling about how it works is you starting to analyze the effects. But then you're going to do much more analysis of the data you've collected. And a lot of it will be reflective, where you're interpreting it. Action research isn't specifically a qualitative research method, but in general, because it's a small sample size, it's a very personal interpretation of things, it lends itself much more to qualitative analysis. So you may have some quantitative things. If you did a pre and post, you might measure what was the change. How much did my students' knowledge of this language feature change? But you may also be doing more qualitative analysis, looking at how much did they participate? How did they feel about it? How did you feel about it? How do you know the intervention worked or didn't work? So what evidence do you have that it went the way you thought it was going to, or that it didn't work the way you had hoped it would? And then you come to that point in the cycle where you start thinking about, okay, if I'm going to teach this again, or I'm going to teach this same way again, what do I have to change? How am I going to make this better to address the things that didn't work the way I thought they were going to at first? And then you might start another cycle, whether that's in a new semester or a new unit in your class, or you wait until that same whatever content comes up again the following year. So when your cycles happen really depend on what you're researching and what the timing is. So this, I've thought, playing around with the art things you can do in PowerPoint, this seems like a more realistic representation of action research. So instead of being a perfect circle, it's actually this sort of cycle where you plan, you act, you observe, you reflect, and then your planning isn't exactly the same point as it was at the beginning. So sometimes people say, well, how is this different from other research? You're trying something, you're collecting data, and you're analyzing it. Well, one is that dual role that the teacher and the researcher have. And it's an important one to keep in mind, because one of your primary responsibilities is to be a teacher. And so you need to keep that at the top of your mind. Sometimes you might get really excited about something in the data, but then you just can't persist with it because you need to move on, or your students need something different. Sometimes you really want to push students, like make more of this thing or talk more about this, but it gets in the way. You have other things you have to do. You have a responsibility to be the teacher, even if your researcher curiosity is getting the better of you. So that's a big piece, and you have to balance it. You can't also, though, just say, oh, I won't do this right now because I need to teach my class. And then you get to the end of the intervention and you're like, oh, what happened? How did it work? I wasn't taking notes because I was too busy, or I didn't record what the students did in their presentations. Now I don't have any evidence. So that's part of it. You really need to keep both parts in mind. The cyclical part, I mentioned this before, that other research wants to keep everything steady. So you would do the same intervention over and over, or you would do the same measures over and over. But in action research, as you go through these cycles, you change it because you've already analyzed the data to figure out it works or it doesn't work. I need to know something different. I want to try something else. My students are responding in different ways than I thought. Another option is to bring students in as collaborators. A lot of great action research, the students are part of it. So it's not just that they're the subjects of the research. The teachers can bring them in as helping to analyze the data. One of my master's students did that, where he had the students, what he was trying out was, if we use one Google Doc, all the students are writing on the same Google Doc, rather than each student has their own text, what's the effect of that? And so each student got like a tab in the Google Doc. They could go and look at what the other students were producing across the whole term. And then he actually brought the students in to analyze it and said, let's look at this and see, where did you draw on or make use of what your classmates were writing? And a lot of them were able to point things out and say, oh, see that, that thing I did in my writing here, that was because I looked at so-and-so's and saw she was doing this thing. And so I thought, oh, I could do something like that too. So it turned out that the students really were a piece of the process beyond just producing the text that was analyzed. And then the beauty of action research is it's super flexible. You could do a tiny little action research study on one day of teaching something, and then figure out, the next time I teach this, how am I going to do it similarly or differently? Or it could be 2 full years of teaching across university level classes. So any kind of scale works. So the other thing sometimes people push back on is they say, well, but what you've just described is what all good teachers should do. Good teachers should be reflective. They should look at what their students have produced and think about how well their teaching is working. And that's very true. I mean, reflective teaching is a good practice and you should do it. But what makes action research another step beyond that is really the connection to scholarship, thinking about it as research rather than just teaching. So you may be developing interventions based in what you've seen in literature you've read or heard teachers and researchers talk about at conferences. It may be something theoretically grounded. As grad students, you have learned about theories and you think, okay, I want to see how well does this explain how my students are learning this concept. The other piece is the really systematic data collection. So reflective teaching, you may not collect data beyond just the work that the students are producing. But in action research, you may collect additional data. You might survey the students specifically to find out what do they think about it. You might interview them. You might have them, like I was saying with my students' collaborative analysis, actually have them analyze the data too. And then this last point, sharing the findings beyond the classroom. So it's not required. You could do action research just for yourself. But a lot of the scholars in action research say one of its contributions is that democratizing of research. And if you share your findings through presenting them at a conference, publishing them in an article, there are more and more journals that will publish action research studies. Then your findings actually go far beyond just changing your own classroom. So keeping that in mind as why it's more than just good teaching is really good, because we want, and Multilelo's whole purpose is this democratization of research, making it accessible to teachers, and the other way around, having teachers show researchers that they are doing good research. Okay, so before I go into the how are you going to get this done, I'm going to turn it over to Lucas, who will tell you about a study he did way back when he was a master's student.
Yeah, this is 10 years ago, but thank you to Multilelo and Betsy for inviting me to talk a little bit about this. So I'm going to, as Betsy already mentioned, action research is kind of this cyclical process. So today I want to talk about what I did here at UH, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about what I did during each parts of this process. And so just for context, this was back in 2016. I was teaching in the ELI, so I taught ESL 100, which is the freshman composition course for multilingual writers, so all second language learners. And then in 2017, I taught 2 sections of that course. So this research project actually spanned those 2 semesters. So it's kind of a semester by semester design. And as Betsy said, the first step to any action research is thinking about some type of problem. So thinking about something that could be improved in the course design. And one thing that I had noticed was related to the research paper. So based on my own experience and also my experience teaching composition courses, I found that students often struggled with this part of the class, writing a research paper, for a couple different reasons. First, oftentimes students struggled finding a topic that was deemed academic, This was something that came up really early. I had a student who went to high school actually here, and she told me how much she hated doing research projects because in high school, her teacher kind of forced her to do a topic that was considered academic. And she wrote, I think it was a paper about economic consumerism. And so she hated it. So she came into the class being like, I don't want to write, I don't want to do this project. So that was one thing that was in my mind. But related to that, so students, because of that, they feel disconnected from the topics and they don't really know how to add their voice sometimes into the writing project. It's often framed as you need to read all of these research papers that other people have written and just kind of synthesize it, right? But then they don't know how can they add their own perspective. And so the question that I came up with is, how can I still teach this genre and keep it in the curriculum, but make it more engaging and meaningful? And so when I thought about the intervention, I had a couple different ideas, but what I ultimately decided was that it might be interesting to try piloting a field research project unit. So instead of just having the students do a traditional library-based unit, I would actually encourage the students to go out, choose some type of site or topic, social issue that they were interested in, and then do interviews, surveys, observations, whatever made sense to them. And so this was kind of based on a couple different theories that were in my mind. One is Van Leer's action-based pedagogy, which is an approach to course design, which takes students' agency and kind of their own values as the core component of the design. But I also drew from things like critical literacy, for instance, thinking about multimodality and writing for different purposes, and language learning ethnographies. And so ultimately what I did was I designed kind of this project unit with the goal of not only helping them improve their writing skills, but also think more critically about issues that were related to their own lives. And the product that it ended up being through the second round of this was a portfolio with a research report, two-page reflection, but then also a lot of reflection along the way. So it was a portfolio kind of based approach. And so these were the outcomes that I came up with, that they would engage with a variety of academic texts. They'd work through the process of writing and research. They would read, summarize, cite works, and then they'd analyze their own data. So all of this is things that are regularly done in a composition course, but I was kind of changing it or pushing it more into their own direction so they had ownership over what they were doing in terms of the research. And so ultimately, the product of this action research project was a project unit. It was about 8 weeks with 4 different sections where I introduced field research, I did a short unit on methods, and then we worked on writing and presenting. So this was kind of the end of the semester. So before that, we had already worked with other genres and they already had some of the foundational skills. But one thing I want to mention is this was not the initial unit that I organized. So this came about from the action research cycle. So I piloted one thing my first semester and it went okay. And then I kind of revised it over time. And so in terms of the data, as Betsy already mentioned, there's a lot of different data that we can use. And I think one thing that's really important to note is that most of the data is stuff that we already are doing, right? You don't actually, and in my case, I didn't have to do a lot of additional research in this project. So most of the data that I used included things like student work and their reflections, their feedback, my own classroom observations, and then also I did record some meetings. So that might be the one extra step that I took where I had to record and transcribe things. But other than that, everything was regular classroom practices that then I used for the reflective process. And so as I already mentioned, I piloted the project in the fall of 2016. And then based on the first round of notes and the student feedback, I updated the unit and tried it again in the spring of 2017. And in terms of how I reflected on this, I kept all of the data in a binder. So this is back when, I mean, it's 10 years ago, but we still printed out worksheets and stuff. So I had a whole binder of all my notes and all the student work. And so I had that. And what I mostly focused on and reflected on was first, were students actually improving their writing skills and applying the skills in the writing that they were doing? And then also, what was their own reflection? What was their feelings and progress about their own project and progress? And so based on this, I mean, this is just kind of what I thought of as what were some of the outcomes that I noticed was I thought, yes, students did engage in topics that were meaningful to them. In a lot of the comments at the end of the semester, the students had mentioned how much they enjoyed this and felt like it was something that was something that they'd never done before, where they were kind of given a hand in choosing what they wanted to study. There was a lot of collaboration throughout, so both with me and with each other. And also, because of this project, since some of them, or many of them, or all of them, were second language speakers, this also pushed them to communicate with people outside of the university. So for most of them, they had to do interviews. And so they also had chances and opportunities to build other skills. I thought it might be interesting to show some of the topics that they chose. One thing that I was nervous about was because it was kind of focused on social issues, I thought some of the science students would not really be that interested, but they actually came up with some really cool topics. I had one student who was in earth sciences and he did his project on beach erosion and how tourists understand that. So he actually went to Waikiki and he went to some other beaches and basically just asked people like, do you know about beach erosion? And do you know the impact you have? So it was really interesting. I had an engineering student who looked at freshmen and the difficulties they face. But then other different topics. One student looked at Japanese identities in Hawaii. She moved here when she was in high school, so she was interested in kind of migration. One student looked at international students and homesickness. Another looked at community efforts to help the unhoused population. So that one was really nice example of also that community engagement. So he actually, for the project, joined, I can't remember what, but some like NGO or community group where he was going out and helping provide food and shelter. And so one of the things, so I have a lot of comments that the students had, but one thing that I wanted to highlight was the thing that I thought was interesting was a lot of them did kind of shift their orientation towards research and writing. So for instance, the first student talked about how they were really surprised that research can be, and I think for all of us, we think of research as data driven, right? We go out and we collect data, but at that level, a lot of them don't have that understanding. So I think this was something really new and interesting for them. And then also just kind of reflection on what culture means, right? So they were interested in thinking about research as an approach to looking at something from new perspectives. So here we see evidence of that kind of critical thinking skills that are important for any writing and research. And so even though I'm just talking about what I did that first year, that was a project that I've brought with me into many different contexts. So before coming back to UH, I also taught at IEPs in the US, I taught at an international university in Japan, and I've continued updating and developing this project and trying to see how it works. So even though the action research part, I focus on that first year, it's something that is ongoing, and I've tried to continue to update and adapt for different levels. So for instance, one year I was teaching kind of a lower level group, and I wanted to see if this works, right? So there's different things that you can continue doing that you have the foundation for. And so I thought this was really beneficial to me because it gave me kind of an organized approach to improve my classes, but also in teaching in different institutes, right? If, like Betsy said earlier, if you are given a curriculum, but you want to make the changes, you're going to need some type of documentation and rationale. So having all of this data helped me implement this project into other teaching contexts because I already had something that said, this works and we can try it here. But also on a more personal note, I think it's made me more observant and reflective because you're always kind of thinking about what's happening in the classroom. All right, so that's all about my first project. I put a couple references in here. These are some kind of classical works on action research, and then a couple papers about different ways to do analysis. So for instance, classroom discourse analysis or content analysis. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. That was a great overview of what it can look like when you get into doing action research. And I'm really glad that you were able to kind of continue doing that after you finished your master's. I also want to just point out this Burns book that Lucas has in his references is available as an ebook in the UH library. So you can get it and read it yourself for no extra cost. But it's a really useful reference. It says English language teaching, but doesn't have to be about English language teaching. It works in any language. So yeah. Okay, so now's the workshop part. This is where you're going to actually do some thinking and planning and everything. So I put if you haven't got the slides up, you're welcome to get them up and then you can just click. But all the things I have for you are short URLs with QR codes too, so you can get them that way as well. Okay, so the first thing is action research right for you? We've been singing its praises, but sometimes you're just not in the right place to do action research. So you want to think carefully before you jump off into the deep end. So this is a forced copy Google Doc. I think it's the one I used last month for a conference. So it might say RELP conference at the bottom of it. That's okay. It's the same document that I just keep changing the thing at the bottom of, and I figured I already had a QR code for it. So make it your own. So basically this is a set of questions. It's a pull down menu to say yes or no for each one. And then a little box where you can reflect on what does this mean for you? And you don't have to answer yes to everything to be in a good place to do action research. But if you answer no to a lot of things, it might be time to think about like, maybe now is not the right time. Some of the factors are personal. And if you are not very comfortable with uncertainty and you don't think you're going to change that in the future, this may not be the right action or the right research method for you. But if the issue is something that can be changed, like finding a mentor to help you as you're doing research, then that's certainly something to keep in mind. So how are we doing for time? Oh, we got plenty of time. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this on your own, to kind of just go through it. Think about, if there's one that you want to write a little reflection, you can use the box to the right of the pull down menus. And if you go through it pretty fast, feel free to chat with somebody next to you. Yeah.
I'm Ray. I'm the faculty member at Bonneville University. Lots about. Yeah. I just wanted to come down because see in what kind of space this was, and I really liked the format. So I would be interested in doing something similar.
Cool. Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of take part and.
Oh, yeah. And I'm happy to talk more if you want to brainstorm like things you could do with your own teachers and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I've done a bunch of action research myself, so if you want to utilize me, that's if you want me to just be part of the.
Yeah, either way, totally up to you. Also, I'm thinking we're actually ahead of what I was thinking of the schedule would be, so we may have some time for more kind of talk story. Wait. I gotta go the other direction in order to see what people are doing. Because that's if you want to make your own short. So those are Go to the one that point out slash, yeah, capital U, capital Y. Yeah, I know how to get it to go from here, probably to capital, at least, yes, so. I don't know why it's not working, yeah. And that's why it's even. Yeah, okay, so now, go to. Gosh, share. What you're talking about. That will be it. So you have to turn it up on your computer so that then you can see. So your phone can see your image. What was that? Yes. Go through the whole quiz for yourself. Give maybe like 2 more minutes so we don't move on, but if you build it all out, you're welcome to talk to. Yeah, paragraph. Oh, there you go. Oh, okay. Oh, because it was a sign in. Yeah, try typing that. Or did you get my slides? Yeah, so you just have to make sure you got the type the capital letters.
Okay, that's
Lowercase is a different thing.
That's fine, that's maybe fun.
All right, is anybody finding that you're well suited for doing some action research now, or right it now is not the right time for you? Maybe, yes, no, okay, good, all right. I'm gonna move on just in the interest of time, but this is your copy of this document, so hold on to it. You might come back to it later and sort of fill in more on the boxes. And to think about, what exactly would it take for you to be ready to do some research as you go. Okay, so once you know, yes, I am good at I am ready to go to do some research. Then you've got to think about, what do I want to research? Finding your topic. So what you want to do, think about, who are your students? What do you know about them? What do you know about what they are interested in? I mean, Lucas had a great example of starting to understand that his students thought research was one very narrow thing, when as academics, we actually know a lot more, that research is not just going and looking things up in the library. Research is actually having a question to begin with and then collecting data that will help you answer the question. And so that was what drove the innovation in his teaching. And you may have something else where you see, oh, my students are really stuck on this. Maybe it's because of the way we've been teaching it so far. So let's try something different next time. What could I do that might address this thing I'm seeing in my classroom? So you might start with thinking about challenges. If you've realized a lot of things, sometimes you get kind of hung up on, there's a lot going on in my classroom that I don't like. You might need to prioritize it. What would be the most pressing thing? Or what would be the thing that I could actually address through changing something in my teaching? Sometimes there's stuff you just don't have any control over. It's your students' lives outside of school that's the problem. But maybe you've also noticed that you tried doing something in your teaching and is just not getting through to the students. So that could be a place to start too. Could be, last time you taught this particular grammar topic was problematic and they just didn't get it. So that might be an area to work on. But this is a good place to start and doing a lot of reflection of what's going on. What do I see happening in my classroom? What am I, what are my students doing? Where are they struggling? What do I need to do in the end? So really thinking about, for my class, what are those learning outcomes that I have to achieve by the end of the term? That can also be a piece that's important to think about, how do I use my research to help my students get to that end goal? And then you want to think about the intervention. So what is it that you're going to try that's different from how you've been doing it before? So given those problems that you've noticed, what could you try? And Lucas had the definition. I sometimes put that one on slides, so you can go back and look at that. But the idea that an intervention, if you're coming out of the K-12 world, you might think about interventions as being like these things that are done when a kid has particular learning difficulties. But intervention really just means stepping in and trying something different, whether it's trying something completely different, making something up because you can't find any possible solutions, or trying something you saw a colleague try in their classroom, or you went to a conference and you saw somebody explain it. Or you read a research paper where a professor speculated, like, here's the thing we could try in this situation. And nobody's tried it before, but you think, okay, I see how that might work in my class. So intervention can be any of those kind of things. It could be a change to the materials you use. It could be a change to assignments. Could be a change to the way you teach. So potentially you have been doing a lot of like standing up in the front of the room and talking, to the whole class, and thinking about maybe what I could do is stations. Students are in small groups. Some of them are self-access, they're teaching themselves or doing an activity together, and then I will work with a small group to teach a thing. So lots of different possibilities for what your intervention could be. At this conference, that slide was copied out of a conference slide, so oh well. But then you also want to think about, how do I customize it for my own class? Because most of what you'll see coming from outside isn't going to be exactly, like you can take it and just make photocopies and it's ready to go in your class. You may need to change things to make it work with your students. Thinking about, like, if you're teaching people who grew up in Hawaii and the reading is all about snow or trains. I just talked with one of our undergrad students who's excited to go to Thailand because he's never taken a train in his life. But if the materials were originally about trains and nobody in Hawaii knows what it's like to ride a train, then maybe trying to customize it so that it appeals to what your students understand. And then also, as I noted before, you want to start before you even do the intervention, thinking about how are you going to collect data? And Lucas mentioned naturally occurring forms of data. Action research in teaching, your students are generating all kinds of things that can be data. So student work, projects. So whatever they do at the end of their a unit where they're creating something. All of the drafts that go into those projects too. So not just the final product, but also, the things that they scribbled down and then decided they didn't want to do that. That could be really interesting data. Slides from a presentation. So if they're talking about something they've done. Essays they write. Exercises, worksheets, if it's printed out, keep a binder of them, pile it all up. Or just scan it, taking pictures of everything they do can be a way to give it back to the students, but you still have a copy. But then also you can observe what's going on as the students are working on something. So if you have them working in groups and you're not needed to stand up in front of the room, you can actually kind of walk around and pay attention to what they're doing jot down some quick notes during class so you don't forget, maybe a little quote you heard somebody say, or, make some notes on which students are working with which other students. As we say in ethnography, though, you don't want to leave just those little rough notes, because a lot of the details are in your head right now, but they'll dissipate by the time you move on. So after class, taking those little notes and writing up a much more detailed description of what happened during the class. So making a record so you have a trace of this is what happened during class. And that can include, what did you do as a teacher? What did you see your students doing? How did it feel? Did this feel like everybody was doing well and enjoying it? Or did it feel really hard trying to help the students in a particular way? You can also collect data that's recordings of students doing things. We'll talk a bit about this when we get to the IRB part, but if you are able to do this or allowed to do this, making videos of students doing stuff can be really helpful, because then you'll be able to hear them and see them. You can see as they're doing things, whatever they're doing, talking to each other, gesturing, moving around. But also presentations. And presentations can be a great one, because you could also then share the video with the students and have them reflect on, how did it go? Did you present the way you planned to? Do you see yourself doing something now that you didn't intend to do? So videos don't have to be just for your research. They can also be a piece of your teaching. But all of these are things that don't actually require any extra work on your part as a teacher. They're pieces of your normal teaching. And they show you a lot of what students do during class and in how they perform. But sometimes your research questions may need a bit more. You might also want to know, what do they think about it? So you might do surveys, some sort of, Likert scales, multiple choice, open-ended, where you ask students about various things. It could be how they enjoyed an activity. It could be what they are planning to do with the knowledge that they've gained from the project. Any kind of thing would be possible to survey students, and then you get their perspectives. One of my students, when she was doing some action research in Thailand, found that she was asking students, she was trying a lot of different activities to try to get them engaged. And she would ask them, did you like this activity? And every single activity, they said, yes, 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 yes. And she was like, it didn't look like that from my observations. So I've got to figure out, how do I get at which activities did they like better than the other ones? And she figured out that if she had them rank the activities, then it forced them to figure out which ones did I like the most. And so that turned into a much better use of, or a much better way to gauge, the effect of, or the impact of the activities on the students. Interviews. If you've got a good relationship with students where they would be comfortable talking with you, do an interview, sit down with them, have them tell you about their process in making a thing of some sort, or how they interact with their classmates during an activity. All kinds of stuff can be asked in interviews that you wouldn't be able to see specifically when you observe them. Sometimes focus groups students are more comfortable this way, because there's several students and it's not like one-on-one with your teacher. So it could be more of a conversation. Focus groups sometimes also allow students to sort of build ideas. They might not immediately think of something, but somebody else mentions it and the other person will go, oh yeah, I did that too. So if you know that your students get along with each other, you don't want to do a focus group with students who absolutely hate each other, because then they'll probably talk less. But if they get along with each other, they may build and help each other with contributions. And then, like I was mentioning, if you want to see, does this intervention help students learn to do X? You really need a measure before the intervention of how well can they do X to begin with. And then you do that same measure at the end to see, are they better at doing this thing? Whether it's a grammar structure, some sort of vocabulary, some kind of a genre knowledge, all kinds of things you can measure with pre-post tests. And then you could also have other people come in and observe. So sometimes if you feel like, oh, I'm too busy at teaching to take notes, you could have a colleague come in and take notes for you. It may be that what you're hoping is your intervention will help, improve students' willingness to participate. And you could have you give them a list of all the students and where they're sitting, and then they just make tick marks every time they see a student raise their hand or offer something, speak up, talk to a partner, whatever kind of thing you want some evidence of. Other people are able to do that when you can't completely do it yourself. So lots of forms of data that you can collect. And sometimes you may not end up using it, but it's better to have it and not need it than get to the end of your project and realize, I think they've learned this grammar structure really, really well, but I don't have any measure of what they were doing before. So pre-post test, even if that doesn't turn out to be the most important part of your research outcome, it's okay. If you've got it, you've got it. Okay, so this is another reused one. I don't remember what the footer on this one will say, but this is a table, basically. And this is one that I recommend, even if you're not doing action research, whatever kind of research you're doing, think about aligning your research questions with the forms of data that will help you answer those questions. And once you know the data, then you also want to be thinking about who are you going to collect it from? Do you need to collect data from all your students? Can you collect from a subset of students? How often do you need to collect it? Is it something you want to do every day, or can you collect it once a week or once a month? How are you going to collect it? Is it something that they can do on Llamaku, or is it something that you need to actually go record? Lots of possibilities with that. So be thinking about how you're going to get that data. So I'm going to give you, I know you don't have a plan on research questions yet and everything, but give you a couple minutes to make your own copy of this table and then sort of start thinking about, for a possible study I would do, how am I going to do this? What data, all of that. Did it come up? Okay, good. I had another one that somehow the short URL stopped working. Yeah.
So, something for environment, basically, how to control them. Not always nice. They try to the most basic parallel.
Yeah.
That's on the nuance.
Yes.
And also students also need to be studying how conjugated and then for creative.
Yeah.
You have to know what speech it is to have these ground time. But there's so much extra that is.
Yeah.
So and now for my, if you think about higher level class, maybe it's things or like the money on how to get on the one and then having them go on to different. It's not creating the dictionary, and that really low because it also tells you what all this like a house. And so, and also for examples and the secrets to show you. So, more just with my thought.
Well, but if you were to do something with that on a regular basis, like they actually get that and have somehow trace.
Because I also.
Yeah, I don't know how you would be able to measure, like, unless you have a pretest that has a whole person who might be.
Well, that was fine, because the question was more about raising not their knowledge. This is the metal there, it's like one percent.
Okay, so then it's not specifically like, did they measure anything about this word? So then you would probably want to do some sort of measures of their, this meta awareness. So potentially,
Like, how do they say that?
Yeah.
That's important to learn to learn and have the resources.
yeah,
Even then, and you leave. Like, is that hard? Or is there really on the path? But we never. To go to the point where I was doing it like, I'm not learning it, I have to figure out like, what am I doing?
yeah, so it might, if you had, some sort of pre-test, it's like, how do you go about learning vocabulary?
Yeah.
I do this all the time, I'll never do that, those ones that are, I think I've seen them for a bunch of different skills, but it's like, they go through and for each thing, like I say, I've never done this, I did it all the time, it's like almost every time, I think, yeah. And then do that same thing after you spend some time teaching them more about all the things and small things, resources, yeah. Okay, afterwards, and then maybe also having some students do like a pull out kind of thing where they walk you through their processes. Here's a new word for you, please. Yeah.
So it's okay that we would not doing everything about.
Yeah, and it's, I actually asked about it from that. Yeah, so, I just got here. And, yeah, so I've done, teaching for about 20 years now, so, yeah. I really like being in the classroom, I live experience. A lot of my research, even continuing right now, it's really classroom based.
And like, so you do a bunch of things to show.
Yes.
It's kind
I'm in technology studies.
Here's one of our.
I'm actually embedded in the health program. Yeah. So, obviously, planning like that, most of my research, it's like international students, academic acculturation, the cultural biases and.
So, there's like progressive genius who learn something about how to
I do, actually, for my university, I have a short term study, so usually I think a bunch of students, so it's like short, really short term programs that we.
The intervention.
But we do have a bigger pool of students at our university.
Yeah.
They want to study, just do it. To all, so it kind of, that's kind of where my personal, I guess, back research.
Yeah, so that's. You're
You're a student? Yeah. It's a lot. It did. My topic came out of academic research. So, yes, no, but, in terms of this, everybody, before I started talking, this semester, I started the morning experience. And, while I was doing it, this is where it is big.
Yeah, start doing more. It's kind of. I'm working with teachers, it's like. One way or another.
And I was kind of also interested in the IRB process. I look at from being in the conference, IRB is quite good, especially in tier one. So you can it got a lot more. Very with the same approach. Yes. So I'll be here for a year, so it's just, it's a good chance to work with help and,
I'm enjoying this, hearing people's potential research ideas. We do have a few people in the chat, so are you monitoring if anybody's chatting about anything? Feel free to ask questions in the chat, online people, because I can't see if you're doing anything, but Sarah can let me know. So yeah, keeping track of what you want to, what you're doing and how you're doing it is a really important piece of making it research rather than just good teaching. Okay, and this was part of the selling point for this workshop is how do you get IRB approval for this? Because if you're doing research at the university and you want to use this as any kind of a graduate degree paper, or you want to publish it or present it at a conference, you do need ethical approval. Just doing your teaching, you are not allowed to share what your students create outside of your classroom. So things that you want to be thinking about, one is this dual role. I mentioned it earlier. I mean, it's a challenge for you as the teacher and researcher, but it's also something that the IRB is really concerned with, because they worry that as the teacher, your students might feel like you're coercing them. They have to agree to participate in your research or you'll give them a bad grade. And so you want to really reflect on how am I going to make it really clear to my students that they don't have to consent. They have to come to class and do things. The intervention is your teaching, but they don't have to consent to let you analyze their data if they aren't comfortable with that. Consent forms in the IRB, you can have multiple yes/no lines also. So you could also tell students, you know, you can, if you're comfortable letting me analyze your work, you can check yes to that. But if you don't want to do an interview with me, you can check no on that one. If you don't want me video recording your presentation, or you don't want me to analyze your presentation, you can check no on that line. So having many options for students, it may be some are willing to let you look at the things they've done already in class. And sometimes that's great data anyway, even if you don't have every student's interview consent. Another one though is to continue to be aware of how your students are responding in class, because it may be that they still check yes on the consent form because even though you've tried to make it clear to them they're not required to participate, they feel like they should. But then while you see them, or if you try to get them to come for an interview and you sense, they're kind of reluctant, they don't really want to do this, it may be a case of they're showing you they don't want to participate even though they signed the consent form. So it's important to really keep checking in with students. It's not something where you can just say, okay, consent form signed, we're good to go. And then you also want to really think about the research specific data. So classwork, things that students are doing anyway, that's fine. That's part of your teaching and they're doing it because it's part of the lesson. But if you're also asking students to do other things, you know, if you want students to be coming in for interviews, if you're doing various surveys that don't lead into your teaching at all, you might think about, am I asking students to do more than is reasonable? And reasonable really depends, but I mean, thinking about college students who are taking 5 classes, probably working a job, maybe also in a club or playing a sport or doing responsibilities for their families, it may be that giving them surveys every so often on top of their regular classwork is just too much. One of my grad students, last time I taught the action research class, was she had her students writing reflections that were a part of her teaching, but more so she had them doing it because she really wanted the data. But what she realized was it was just, she was kind of pushing them to do all these reflections and it wasn't advancing her teaching as much as she needed the teaching to go. The students were kind of getting burnt out writing a lot of reflections. And so she decided to scale back on that because I mean, it was useful for the teaching, but it wasn't the most important part. And she didn't want to, you know, ruin the students' experience just generating data for her research. So that's an important part, monitoring that impact. And also really being flexible, because even the greatest intervention may not be right for your class. And if you start seeing it's either just not working or the students are really responding badly to it, it may be time to just say, okay, scrapping this, not going to continue with this intervention, we'll do something different to help you learn. And that actually in action research terms is not a problem. That's a finding. I mean, realizing as long as you document it. So that's why that teacher journal is important, but saying, you know, in my notes, I realized I was continually seeing students doing X, Y, and Z, and I realized it wasn't working. So I stopped doing the intervention. That's a finding, and that's perfectly okay. I mean, even in quantitative research these days, there's talk about how non-significant results actually should be published, because we need to know what doesn't work. We can't just publish the things that are amazing and wonderful and have impact. We've got to know, I tried this and it didn't work. And that should be publishable. It's too often it's not yet, but there are a few places where you can publish it. You can also talk about it at conferences. That's sometimes a good place for non-significant results. Okay, but then there's also the question of how do you explain all this to the IRB? So when I taught this action research seminar, it was in 2020, and I made some templates for my students. That's what's in this Google folder. There's a consent form and a set of the questions that are on the IRB protocol. Some of that has changed a little bit in the last 6 years. So please make sure you're using the IRB's most recent templates. Don't use my consent form template, because the IRB's made some changes, but the parts that are specific to action research should be about the same still. So feel free to access those documents and check out the language on them. I probably should have highlighted them. Maybe I'll go in and do that after the workshop, but the things that are really action research specific. One is on the consent form, having a line that tells the students, I recognize that I have dual roles. I am your teacher and the researcher, and I promise you that I won't do anything, you know, I won't, it's something along the lines of, if you don't want to participate, I won't treat you any differently. Something like that, just to really show the students the research is not going to depend or determine your grade. So some of the things, I've had conversations with the IRB, and I have actually found that if you're doing action research and you describe the study as action research, but your title does not include the words action research, the IRB will reject your study and say teachers should not research their own students. But if your title says action research, then they will understand it as action research. So that's number one tip. The UHIRB, include the word action research in your title if you're doing action research. The next piece is you don't have to tell them everything you're doing in your teaching. They don't need to know all the things you plan to do that are normal parts of your teaching. Even if they're part of the intervention, it's a teaching intervention, and that's just your curriculum. So you don't have to tell them that. The only thing you have to tell them is what you're actually going to collect for research. So they want to know the research specific things you're doing. So are you going to video record? Are you going to interview? Are you doing surveys of anything that's not part of your regular teaching? If you start every semester with a survey, and that's what you do anyway, that's actually teaching related. That's just student work. And so you don't have to give them a copy of that survey. But if you're doing a survey that's specifically asking them about how does this particular intervention work for you, or here, I need information about this that I wouldn't normally collect information about, that's a research specific survey. So those are the things they need to know. They also want to know, how will you explain this to your students? So the recruitment script, even though you know who your students are, you're not going out and recruiting random people. You're recruiting your own students. You need to give the IRB a sense of what are you going to say to the students to explain the study. And so that's an important part as well, is that recruitment script. The other part is that how will you ensure them that you're going to treat them fairly, even if they don't consent to participate? And so making that clear to the IRB. And then also, if you are going to do any kind of research specific things during class time, making it clear what you'll do for the other students who are there. So if you want to do focus groups during class time, what will the students who don't consent do? Is there going to be an alternative activity? Is it some sort of discussion thing where they'll all be in a discussion and you'll just make a group of students who aren't consenting, and then the ones that are consenting, you'll audio record or something? Let them know. Same with if you plan to video record for your research purposes. How are you going to set up the room so the students who don't want to be in the video are not in the video, but still get to do everything in class? So you want to think about that. You know, video, it's totally possible. You can angle it so that you get half the classroom, and then you just make sure that consenting students are in the path of the video, non-consenting students are not. Okay, whoops, and that's it. So questions about the IRB? We got plenty of time. Has anybody successfully done an IRB for a teacher research, action research kind of study?
Right, what you explained happened to me. I very clearly explained, I went to the IRB, worked with someone there, explained what my study was. I wrote it out exactly. We went through 2 rounds of feedback, all just changes wording. And finally the third person said exactly that. Teachers cannot be, I was like, everyone along the way does know what my research is. And
yeah, it was 2013, I think, that Graham Crooks, me, a couple of professors from the College of Ed, and a nursing professor went to talk to the IRB because we'd all had the experience of them saying nurses can't research their own patients, teachers can't research their own students. And we were like, but these are common practices in our fields. You know, this is what nursing research is. Nurses don't research other people's patients. They research their own patients. So we explained to them what practitioner research is, talked with them about, and how do we make it so that we and our students can get permission. And finally it came down to, they were like, well, we need a signal to know that this is acceptable practitioner research. And so putting action research in the title turned out to be the flag, that if it says action research study of learning Spanish verbs or something like that, then they'll be like, okay, you're a teacher doing action research, that's fine. If it's study of learning Spanish verbs, they'll be like, nope, teachers can't research their students. So yes, that is just a weird, but and it only, I mean, that's here, that's our IRB. If you go to another institution, no guarantees how it's going to work. So some institutions, like at UC Davis, they had a really big teacher education program where all the master's students did classroom action research. And so their IRB knew if a study was coming in that looked like that, it's a legitimate teacher research study. But other institutions still are, the IRB has this big manual that they go by, but it's for mostly medical research, and action research isn't something in lab medical research. Apparently nursing research isn't in the book either. So yeah, they also once told us that case studies weren't actual research because there was only one participant. We're like, but we're collecting data and analyzing it. Isn't that research? So They learn. Our IRB is very responsive. The people that work there, you can send them an email, they'll write back, they'll try to understand the situation and help you understand what they need to know in order to review your study. So don't just shut down and be like, oh, they're mean, they won't let me do it. Reach out, find out what's going on, and often they're very helpful. Okay, and I'm happy to review if you have an IRB proposal and you're not sure if the wording sounds about right. I'm happy to consult on that too. Okay, so the last thing, you shouldn't do action research all by yourself, if at all possible. I mean, you can. There's no reason you can't, but it gets very lonely. It's more work than just teaching. There's anything you're doing on top of teaching, and even if the only data you're collecting is student work, you still need to analyze that student work. So that's more work. And a lot of times having some moral support is helpful. So finding other people that are doing action research, if you come up against some sort of dilemma or a challenge, somebody you can chat with. So taking a class or a workshop, you're getting started on that, that's great. Attending conferences where there's sessions about action research, you can hear how other teachers did research, what their challenges were, maybe how they resolved those. Reading books, reading studies, understanding how other people's research went is good. But then also reaching out for mentoring. So talking to someone who can help you if you're stuck on something. If you're not sure how to go about systematically collecting and analyzing data, that's a great reason to have a mentor who can help you more with that aspect. Doing it together. So if there's several teachers in a program, do an action research project together where you can collaboratively support each other. Try the same intervention in all of your classes. You can get a much bigger sample set too. And building some time into your schedule. It's the same as any habit. You've got to actually block off the time and say, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to do other things. And that too, if you have somebody else you're doing this with, you can schedule it together and say, this is going to be our action research hour. We'll sit down and talk about the data we've collected. And that's really helpful. So making it possible. And I am very, very fond of having other people to work with. I don't get much writing done at all on my own, but anytime I'm working on a writing project with other people, I'm there because it's a commitment to another person. Looks like we do have a comment or a question in the chat. Oh, that was just you saying you can ask a question if you want. Okay. But that's it. So this goes to the slides again, if you did not get the slides ahead of time. Lowercase x, capital D, lowercase I for the slides. And